Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Soulganize Your Live podcast. I'm Wynn Lacey, and this is where we discuss the difference between how we normally organize our lives from an egoic, very distorted perception that we were taught, and hopefully start soulganizing your life from a divinely inspired power. Your soul has nothing but love for you, and your ego will always tell you that you'll never be enough. Your soul is constantly whispering to you or hitting your inner self to help you create some confidence, and your ego is always telling you you need to create more achievements or possessions or something to organize outer confidence. Your soul is always going to create opportunities for you to learn, and your ego is going to convince you need to control life and buckle down and don't trust people and judge them, and on and on and on. So we're really going to try to discern the difference between that here. And I think once we do, it's up to each person to decide they want to flush out their ego's tendency to cause them suffering. I know you can't get rid of it, but you can help to at least alleviate some of the suffering. And after flushing it out, you have the ability to hear those faint whispers from the soul. So our guest here today is, again, here to help us do that. So welcome to the show, Ethan, who is going to do a little bit further introduction of himself in a second, but just wanted to say thank you so much for coming on. And we are kindred spirits. We did not go through IPEC together, but we have been trained and drank the Kool-Aid from IPEC and sent us on the journey. So we are definitely kindred spirits in that way. And you have gone on to be a full-time coach. You are working hard in the executive area and life and leadership. And I'm just so thankful to have you here for a half hour to discuss your journey. So thanks, Ethan.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate one, being here, but two, the frame with which kind of how I hear you setting this up for folks. And I think what I hear underneath what we're talking about is like an invitation for a different way of being. Mm-hmm. And it's not something generally that we're taught. It's a thing we kind of have to discover. And when we find the threads of the things that we can pull on that let us live more intentionally, authentically, the world really changes for us. So really happy to be able to kind of support.
Thanks. And it is painful a lot of the time. I remember thinking it was going to be like feeling really good. And I'm like, no, this is like super painful to uncover my crap. Totally. And see the ego for what it is. And then I watched the ego get a lot smarter than me, and it fought back. And it's a constant struggle. And then at some point you get in touch with that higher self, which is what we called it at IPEC, soul, spirit, whatever that was. But anyway, what led you to go into coaching? And through IPEC specifically, it very much is about raising your consciousness, not just coaching. And so I know that you probably have a really cool story around how you ended up there.
Yeah. So my formal education was in engineering, and so studied aerospace engineering.
Oh, wow.
And took a job, and so it was actually Midwest, right? So Chicago growing up, University of Minnesota for engineering school, and then that took me out to Seattle to work with Boeing right out of college. And I worked there for about 10 years, and over the course of that time, I did everything from like analyzing brackets on airplane engines to integrating full-scale tests of engines on airplanes, and did that from most of it from a leadership lens, whether it was a lead engineer, engineering manager. And it was at some point in that journey where I started to recognize I was in a place that was using skills that I had developed, but the skills that I was using and had developed were not the ones that were like in alignment with who I felt like I was, who I wanted to be, and really where I wanted to be and where I wanted to be focused. So I felt this tension at some point in the course of this journey that led me to start asking, like, what is going on? And thankfully had exposure to coaching through my father, going through my education and through work. So knew that was a thing, started working with a coach to uncover this. And I really identified like what I care about are people. I care about how we show up, how we make an impact on one another, my impact on people. And my focus on like the products and the technical was kind of a thing that I was good at. I enjoy aspects of it. It wasn't where I wanted to sort of like point. And so then that started my coaching journey. And that led me to a year in Boeing HR, leading a big coaching program, going back into the business in a talent development space, doing some like internal coaching and consulting, managing in that space, before ultimately going full time on my own practice.
Okay. And then what made you want to go to IPEC, which is really a conscious raising coaching rather than all the other coaching schools? Like, what was it about that helped you, pick them?
Yeah. I mean, talk to any IPEC grad, right?
Yeah.
The one, like, people's experience through it has been tremendous, right? And and you can feel it when you talk to people who have not only self-identified as a coach, but people who are showing up in different ways, the sort of shift in orientation towards themselves and their world. So one, just that sort of intuitive sense, and then doing some research and comparing different programs and looking into them. I just continually, like, as I was going through this process, it was just like IPEC just kind of hit all these boxes, and was excited to learn the framework and go become a practitioner.
Yeah. And to your point, you said a couple of things. You said that you felt this internal tension at work, even though you were quote unquote successful, right? Yep. You're working for the place that everyone would want to work for if they went to school for aerospace, right? And you are feeling this tension of, like you said, working with products, but realizing like there's a deeper connection that I feel to people that's not being fulfilled or shared here at work, like the way that I'm supposed to work. Isn't people oriented. And then you said you kind of felt this draw from other people who go to IPEC, right? Where they are also like struggling with that internal thing, which I would call like a soul whisper or higher self whisper, like, hey, there's more to life than what you were taught. Right. And our egos are basically just a regurgitation in our minds of like what you've been taught. Right. So I can kind of imagine your journey, right, of like, oh, I'm going to do these things and I'm pretty smart and I can go to engineering and I'm going to work for Boeing. And like, then you're sitting there one day and you're like, why do I feel so out of alignment? Yeah. So what was that like? Like, were you familiar with what the ego was at that point, or were you discerning like the tension and didn't ever call it that? Or what was happening in that moment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there was around that time a sort of a co-mingling of different things that were sort of stewing for me. And I think part of it was that awareness of ego. And that's, questions like, I guess this kind of gets at the spirit element, but like, who am I really was like a question in there. Who do I want to be? So there was sort of this this tension between, I want to choose, right? I want to choose who I am and how I show up and what I focus on. And there's like what I felt like was inertia of this just sort of like forward momentum that if left unchecked, I would end up somewhere 40 years down the line, having lived a whole life. And I'd be like, what happened? Right. I feel fortunate that I was able to catch some of those like questions, like grab them, hold them, and not try to force them down or ignore them. I feel that it was a mix of the people in my life at the time, of my, and this, I'm talking family, I'm talking friends, general folks I'd connected with, like sort of larger community of, it's okay to not have it all figured out, right? Some of the like ego tempering things that were in the mix for me that allowed me to kind of take that question, sit with it. And then but you asked for the moment, it happened over years. And I, in some ways, I mean, I think it's still happening, right? I fully identify as like still being on the journey.
Yeah. And again, like if the ego doesn't go away, but I love what you said. You're like, there's this moment of almost like, I pictured you like like you're saying, like, I'm on this like moving volcano lava, like just it's going to keep moving this way. Nothing is going to get in its path. It's just going to eat it up. And I'm going to be at the end of like 40 years and being like, I just lived somebody else's life.
Yes.
And you were saying, like, I'm hearing faint whispers, like, who are you really, Ethan? Like, maybe you can figure it out, you know? And so then that's what I want to help the audience discern, is like those moments that maybe you feel like, whatever. And you just keep going. Like, they're such important moments. They're so important. And to your point, like, if you don't have anybody around you, like you did, you had a dad who was a coach and sort of grappled with this already. Or if you don't have someone who's believes in a higher self or whatever, like they're just like, no, just keep going, you'll be happy. And like, you're like, no, you're not gonna.
Yep.
You know, and yeah, so that's a really cool moment. So then you went, so did that help you start discerning that there were two of you? Did you already know that you were both a human and a being all of your life? Or how did you interpret yourself up into that moment?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I had moments of awareness over the course of my life that I'm making decisions to try to control other people's perception of me. Like there was like, and maybe it's hindsight, but I can think back to like moments in high school and moments in college where I'm in these new uncomfortable spaces and I'm semi-consciously making choices to wear certain clothes or listen to certain music that were somewhat aligned, but also very much influenced by the external. So I had some of those sorts of like semi-conscious. I'm not sure if that's in your psychological sort of framework, but that's how it feels and felt, is like there was some inkling of awareness. Maybe it's the soul whisper, actually, of like, I'm making these decisions that I know that maybe they're not the most authentic thing. So in those moments and in those times, can you repeat the question?
Well, it's mostly like you're saying, I'm starting to, I was trying to point out, like, you did take the effort to acknowledge, like, either I stay on this inertia, which is just a loud voice in the head telling you everything it's ever learned, like, these are the things you should do, right? And then you hear this higher self that is also saying, like, is starting to show you, like, okay, you can listen to that music or hang out with those guys or be in that, do that certain thing, but you're not doing it in alignment with the truth, right? You're doing it to gain, like you said, approval, which is, again, an ego thing. And the soul is not trying to get your approval. So it doesn't intervene. It doesn't interrupt. It says, okay, if you're ever ready, come explore yourself. Right. And that's what you did. Eventually you said, I finally signed up as a coach and learned the difference between those two states of being.
Yeah. And your question of like the awareness of the two sorts of selves, I would say that sort of moment that I described is like kind of the start of it, right? It's starting to like be able to look at this thing directly, and like the nervous system, like it doesn't want to hear that. It doesn't want to hear that, like, hey, what you've been doing for the last 30 years, like, might not actually be it for you. You're like, no, I've put a lot of energy into this. So I think that it was the start for me. And then, a bunch of things came after that, right? Like IPEC training, a couple of, key sort of readings and conversations, and trying to index more more intentionally in spiritual communities and in communities with like entrepreneurship, where people are not taking things personally and where people are showing up in just different ways that I was not used to and accustomed to.
Yeah. Explain like one of those moments where you're like, oh, wow, these people are doing things from a higher self perspective.
Yeah. That's a good question. I'm reminded of an early client that I had. So I had already gone through, actually, I probably hadn't even finished IPEC yet at this point. So it was a fairly early client, and we started working together. I connected with her in sort of a surprising way. And she was like, I feel called that you actually maybe should be my coach. And the pretext of our conversation was her sort of sharing her spiritual journey leading up until that point.
Mm.
and me feeling like, whoa, you are way ahead of me here, right? On your, like, seriously, like connection to self, awareness of these things. And so it was this like very like interesting, rewarding relationship that we had. And then when she oriented towards me of saying like, I actually want to work with you. I didn't even ask her to.
Mm.
And our focus was on how does she integrate these perspectives around sort of spirit, her spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
her new way of being. She was on her journey. How does she integrate that into her very successful, like small business leadership role that she was in? And she felt this like tension, this disconnect. And so our focus was how does she show up in a way that like is authentic, is in alignment with her higher self, even though she felt this sort of like fundamental tension between that and what her environment and existing community expected of her.
Mm.
And so I wasn't working with her on helping her sort of build this like new spiritual perspectives. She was doing that work on her own.
Yeah.
I was there to help her figure out how do I contextualize this, conceptualize this in my life. And her way of sort of showing up and the things she would bring to our conversations was just striking, right? Of thinking about things without attachment, of a recognition of separation, while still like caring and like wanting, to make an impact and have outcomes be nourishing for herself and others. Yet she knew that her approach couldn't be like, I'm going to force this thing to control it or else, right? So she was taking naturally like level 6 sorts of energy approaches. And there were times where it's like, all right, let's talk about level 5. Like, let's pull it down a little bit. And like, what action do you want to take given this sort of range of experience?
Yeah. So just to clarify, in IPEC, we talk about 7 levels, and level 6 is intuition. And that, so when someone says, I feel called, like, I don't have a rational reason to work with you, Ethan, but like, I feel called to work with you. Like, that is the spirit, right? The spirit is, and maybe you are the student at that point, or the teacher, or both, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a beautiful thing. So that's how I would discern the higher self. It's not going to be too logical in the moment. It's not going to make a ton of sense all the time, but you're going to feel the pull. Your ego will say like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Like, you should go for, someone who's already trained and has been a coach for 5 years. Right. And she didn't. And so that's another example of like how you trusted someone to say that to you. And then you're like, let's go for it. And then she's actually looking to you to bring her down to the ground a little bit and say, okay, so I work in a capitalist society. We have money. We all decided as souls to do this. We all decided on capitalism, money. We all decided on business. We all decided this at some level, right? From a soul perspective. And then it's like, okay, so if there's no guilt there, then what does my soul want to do today in the physical? And it sounds like that's what that kind of client was looking for with you.
Totally. Yeah.
And did that help you grow closer to? Yeah.
For like in ways that I think still sort of discover, right? I'll notice things that kind of pop up, and I'll like, she'll pop into my head. I'll be like, wow,
Yes.
that, we talked about this at this point. And it's really like, it's continued to sort of like set me on a path that feels more expansive than would have otherwise. And you said it, right? At that point, like maybe I was the student, and there's the teacher student sort of relationship that was really evident to me in that engagement, but has also highlighted for me of that is the case in all of my coaching engagements.
That's awesome.
There's continual sort of mutual growth. And I think we grow in the presence of other people at different times and in different ways. And it requires us to like let go of some ego, right? If my ego is telling me I'm the expert here and I need to tell people what to do, it's where I'm being driven by ego rather than by soul.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think makes a really clear distinction is when in a capitalist society, there's taking and keeping. And, where you say, I take this and I make a profit and I keep growing, right? Like, and there's not enough to go around. So I better go get mine, right? And with the soul, we'll say, no, there's a giving and a receiving. It's a revolving thing between Ethan and this other client, right? So you will also believe, and I have told my clients this often in therapy, I'll say, I am here because I'm learning from you. Also, like if I come here to only try to save you, I'm going to burn out. So I need to come and think I am a student in the middle of this conversation too. And I know a soul is the thing that is open to that. And it can look to the ego like I'm the therapist and they're the client, but my soul is like, no, there's a giving and receiving happening. And people can teach you as much just through a conversation, right? So it also helps you not get intimidated by people, right? Your ego can get intimidated. Your soul does not, right? And so when you can like feel the egos first, like, like it sounds like you're like, why would you want to work with me?
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, but my soul wants to work with you. So I don't need to be intimidated. I can do this with this person.
Yeah.
And like you said, like it was more of a giving and receiving. And so again, that's another discerning way to know. You said the word expansion, which again, ego will constrict you and force you into like a controlled thing. And the soul will expand you. It'll feel like, poof, I'm better off because I met with that client. I didn't take anything from her. She didn't keep anything. We just literally grew together. And so I'm guessing that's those moments like that are what leading you to be a full-time go into this. Like you put a lot of effort into engineering, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I can only imagine, and then to go and work, and then to feel that like, what kind of transition has this been for you to like fully own this new way of being?
Yeah. I love that question. And it's layered and it's nuanced. And I think the first thing I'll say, because it's gonna continue to pop for me, is everything that came before this moment is influencing what comes next.
Mm-hmm.
And so my engineering training and my, like ruthless commitment to like good grades and like trying to find the right answers and to problem solve and like all of the things that came to look at systems, right? Systems thinking, systems engineering are all things that have shaped who I am. And even I can look back at things and say like, okay, this was a thing that, was maybe like a bit of like people pleasing or things that looking back, I'm aware this has been influenced by my ego, right? That was an ego forward way of showing up. It doesn't mean I don't have that access to those skills and experiences to use, to leverage in ways that are chosen.
Right.
And so when you think about this transition and this different way of being it's almost been like, I'm not a cook, but I'm picturing like you're folding in ingredients as you are making a batter or something. And I'm adding to what I'm doing and it's creating something else as a result. So I've still got the logic, the systems, but I've incorporated ways of like letting go and trusting the process. I thought for a long time, like everything's about awareness. It's like, okay, awareness is important, but there's a step that comes after that and it's acceptance and it's choice. And so it's this incorporation of sort of new ideas that has allowed me to be successful. The other piece I think that I didn't take for granted is having made the final decision, right? So I've been on this journey for 4 years before I actually like ended up resigning from my engineering role. And I didn't appreciate how challenging it would actually be, not from like I knew it would be hard, but challenging in a way that was like much more experiential than I expected. The physical manifestation of like, what like stress and uncertainty and newness and change and noticing my nervous system be like, no, not what we're doing. Right? And so even that, right? Why I say I'm like continually on this journey is because I was doing this for years and having this self-exploration. Then I quit my job and I'm like, whoa, I have a lot more work to do than I thought. And a lot of that has been somatic, and it's been, sort of focused on the body. And that has allowed me to, I think, live a more like integrated life, a more present sort of way of being. And that presence is what I think allows me to stay open to, one, what I'm experiencing when I notice like an ego-driven spike, but also attuned to my clients, to show up on calls and really like hear them and meet them where they're at, and be able to ask questions that may feel like stupid questions, and like if I'm listening to my ego, right, of like, I should know what they're experiencing, right? I should be the expert. Being able to watch those ego messages, stay grounded enough, stay present enough to then ask the question, support the exploration, meet somebody at that experiential soul level. That has been, I think, a big part of my growth that has allowed me to stay present, to stay attuned.
Yeah, you said somatic, which in the body, which I think is really cool. And I think it's another place to discern the difference between the ego hijacking your nervous system and the ego realizing it doesn't have control of your nervous system anymore. Both of those are upsetting, right? Because you just kind of explain, you're like, my ego used to sort of run the nervous system. It would kind of, make the decisions and maybe feel stressed. Right. Like you have to keep going. You have to keep doing this. Right. And that kind of nervous system stress. But then there's okay, I quit my job, and my ego's like, okay, you're not giving me the controls anymore. But then your nervous system still responds because you're a human in a body. And you said you did like somatic kind of work, it sounds like, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's, again, like, our souls want us to have a physical experience. It gave us a body, right? So it's not like the body doesn't matter. And I love your distinction. You said there's the ego sort of control of the body and the systems and the people pleasing. And then there's the healing work almost that you did of somatic release, which means body awareness, right? And so you did some of that. And so you're saying, like, now I've integrated into this person who can sit on a call, feel like my ego is speaking, and I can stay aware. That's the beauty. That's the thing, right? That means you are listening to the soul, identifying your ego, discerning it, and keeping it sort of contained to not cause you suffering on the call with your client.
Right.
Like, that's what I want for every person on the planet. Like, like that's amazing. So before we close up, like, tell me some ways, like, who would be a fun client for you to have? Who do you like to work with? What are some, what's your future soul want to work with?
Yeah, I love the question. And there's a part of me that's like, anybody. I want, give me the growth, the expansion, right? And there is an element of that. And I will just sort of blanket caveat is like, I'm excited for what the future holds. And I expect that will continue to change. Sort of at the moment, and where I'm loving working is with people leading organizations. And that's anywhere from like leaders, like managers of managers, up to folks who are in C-suite, small, mid-sized, large organizations, where and the way I think about it and the way I help people sort of contextualize it is, you've got responsibility to set the tone and the performance for your organization. And there is so much going on outside of you, whether that's hierarchical, it's expectations to stakeholders, bosses, the public. I work with like nonprofit EDs to their community members and the board. So there are always the external pieces, yet as a manager, you are responsible to set the tone for your organization. And your impact as a leader is the number one most important thing there. And if you're going to lead effectively, you have to show up as the most effective version of yourself. And that needs to be sustainable, connected, clear, not ego driven. And so working with people who want to show up as the best, most expansive, effective versions of themselves, and they want to create a space that is around them that is effective and that people want to be a part of, that feels good to be a part of. And so that's been my focus, and will continue to be my focus, is working with leaders and their teams.
Okay, so the ego will tell a leader they're separate, right? The ego will say you're a separate individual. Your energy in the room doesn't really have an impact. It's the numbers, it's the directives, right? So speak, if you don't mind, a little bit more about how you talk to them about your energy is actually impacting them.
Yeah. I love that. So there's a few things here, right? Like, we have to understand the external, right? Like, our organizational objectives are XYZ.
Yeah.
The question is, how do you go about that? And so I think it's a mix of of the beliefs we sort of have about ourselves as leaders. Like one you just said is, we are in this work together, right? The level 5, level 6 leadership of sharing in responsibility, all of our gifts and talents coming together as a unified whole. Level 5 of seeing things as opportunities. Level 6, trusting that whatever action we take will allow us to gain more information, and we'll be able to choose from there. Little 5, 6 mashup.
Yeah.
So part of it's the beliefs that like go into and make up effective leadership.
So you work with someone on their internal beliefs about themselves when they call themselves a leader.
Totally. Cool. Yep. Absolutely. And I think too, in practice, right there, we have so much catabolic energy of the destructive kind of tearing down, of feeling like we're powerless, feeling like we have to do things, feeling like we're, I can't tell you how many times in engineering I hear people say, I feel like I'm pushing on a rope. And if we're noticing that disconnect, the struggle, if we're feeling struggle, that is an indicator that there is a different way of approaching and orienting your work. So it can be as simple for a lot of folks as like they've probably got this highly effective, highly capable level 5 energy, but there's also something that's like blocking them. And so it might even just be like, what are my beliefs about my team? What are my beliefs about my organization? How do I measure success for myself, right? If I want to be I started work with a client who wants to be a CTO. They're currently like a senior director, trying to figure out, do I change organizations? Do I continue to lead where I'm at right now? There's an underlying pressure that this individual, I think, is feeling, is like, I must achieve. Right. And so helping them in this actually conversation is going to help me with this sort of reframing the language a little bit. But like, that's a driver that is going to shape, that's telling you that your value is dependent on a thing that you achieve externally.
Right. That's ego.
That's ego, right? Which is just not capital T true.
It's not true at all.
Not true. And so how does this individual like continue to stay focused on engaging in ways that feel good? But if they're showing up with this, like, I need to go do this thing and it's not where I'm at now. So where I'm at now, there's judgment around that, is helping people like recenter, present where they are, identify like, why do I actually want that thing? So helping people like conceptualize, like, who am I? Why am I here? What do I want to do? How do I lead given all of these things? Is kind of the heart of the work that I do.
That's awesome. And I would say our souls are here in America. We're a capitalist society. We decided to use money. We decided to use business. Like, this is where people can still do the work. Like, and this is what we chose, right? So I love that, if somebody's struggling at work, or as a leader, right, in a corporation, to your point, that feels normal, but it's not necessary. And there's so many people like you, Ethan, that can help them flush that out, right? And go, the suffering is from the ego. The suffering is catabolic state from IPEC, energy leadership. Like there's a way to like flush that out. Yes, it seems normal to struggle, but it's not necessary anymore. Like it really isn't. Like there's enough of us who know it's not necessary.
Yeah.
And you've done your work, and now you're like, but I want to give back to the actual, society of America, which is capitalism, and work with leaders and know that their impact with those people can be insanely like fulfilling. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So, all right. Thank you so much for being here. It's been great. And I hope this gives people a sense of who you are. How would people find you?
Yeah. Thank you. Have really enjoyed the conversation. I'm glad to be able to continue to support your sphere. Best way to connect with me is on my LinkedIn. And then I also, if folks don't have LinkedIn, can also get you an email address, and then my Resmar Partners website is a good way to connect as well. But LinkedIn is where my kind of main focus for social media.
Okay, and it's RESSMEYER. If people are just listening and can't see our names.
Yep.
Partners.com.
Yep.
And I know you're like the first one listed. I saw that today. So
awesome. And you'll, I'm sure you'll put like links to this stuff in whether comments or whatever. So
yeah,
you know where to find me as well.
Okay.
It's up to you. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Ethan. And I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Likewise. Thank you. Take care.
Okay.